My name is Jennifer, and I currently live with my parents while working part-time. I'm 42 years old, and many people might wonder why I'm living at home and working part-time at this age. The reason dates back 6 years. At that time, I had a 12-year-old son, Ethan, and I lived with my husband, David, Ethan, and my in-laws, Mark and Alice, enjoying a relatively happy life. Given that Ethan was 12 and my in-laws were around, I was a career woman, if I do say so myself. But that all changed because of a certain incident. What? Ethan! Just as I was about to enter an important meeting, I received a call from Ethan's elementary school informing me that he had collapsed during sports class. It was a scorching summer day, with the news reporting temperatures exceeding 95 degrees Fahrenheit, so I thought it might be heat stroke. I'm in the middle of work right now and can't leave, so I'll ask Alice, who is at home, to pick him up. After hanging up the phone, I quickly contacted Alice. Alice is a housewife and takes care of most of the household chores, and she didn't have any plans today, so I thought she could pick him up. Hi, Alice. It's Jennifer. I got a call from the school saying Ethan has collapsed. I can't leave work right now. Could you please go pick him up? People might say I'm choosing work over my child, but I couldn't leave because our livelihood depended on it. I asked Alice, feeling sorry.
Oh no, that's terrible. Don't worry. I'll go pick up Ethan, so focus on your work.
Alice understood that I needed to work, so she gladly took on the task. The reason for this is that I was an executive at a large corporation, earning a decent income, while David worked at a small company with a much lower salary. That's why our livelihood depended on me working. I asked Alice to pick up Ethan, and then I finished my work and rushed home. However, even after my regular working hours, I had tasks that needed to be completed, so I couldn't get home until nighttime. I'm home. Ethan? I expected Ethan to be better by now, but when I opened the living room door, I only saw Alice and David. They looked at me with slightly pained expressions. How's Ethan?
Jennifer, we need to talk.
Just as I was about to head to Ethan's room, David stopped me, and I turned to look at him. David and Alice both had serious expressions. At that moment, a terrible thought crossed my mind. Could something have happened to Ethan? With that thought in mind, I sat down at the dining table where Alice was already seated. David sat down next to Alice and hesitated before speaking. Did something happen to Ethan? Unable to bear the silence, I asked. David flinched slightly and then began to speak after clearing his throat.
Actually, Ethan said he doesn't want to see you.
What? I needed a moment to process his words. Ethan, who had been smiling at me this morning, suddenly didn't want to see me. I looked at Alice, but she avoided my gaze. He doesn't want to see me? Why would he say that?
I don't know either. But it's best to keep some distance from Ethan for now. Jennifer, can you go back to your parents' house for a while?
I was honestly shocked. I wondered if Ethan hated me or if I had done something wrong, and without questioning David's words, I took them at face value. Following David's suggestion, I packed a few days' worth of belongings and returned to my parents' house. According to David, Ethan didn't even want to talk to me, so I couldn't reach out to him and returned home without fully accepting the reality. My parents were concerned about Ethan and me and tried to contact Alice and David, but they were told that Ethan couldn't come to the phone, so they couldn't talk to him either. So what I initially thought would be a few days turned into a year without seeing Ethan. Then, one day, I received an unexpected call.
Ethan has passed away.
It was truly sudden. Because of that, I couldn't understand what David was saying, and my mind went completely blank. What are you saying now? Even though I knew David would never lie about something like that, I spoke to him, hoping it was just a joke. But David was silent on the other end of the phone, not responding. That silence made me realize he was telling the truth. From that day, Ethan collapsed. I would never see him again. When's the funeral?
Are you coming?
Of course. I'm his mom. The shock was immense. But there was no point in lamenting. I asked David for the date of Ethan's funeral, but he seemed hesitant to tell me.
The thing is, Ethan said until the end that he didn't want to see you. He even asked that you not be called to his funeral.
David spoke with difficulty after a few seconds of silence. Realizing how much Ethan had rejected me, I couldn't keep my composure and hung up the phone. David never called back, and though my parents tried to insist on my attending the funeral, they were refused, and everything was over 5 days after David informed me. From that point on, my life changed drastically. I became mentally ill and had to start seeing a doctor, and of course, my career that I had built up ended. Although I had to resign from my job, my employer expressed a desire for me to return anytime, which was my only consolation. 4 years after Ethan's passing, thanks to my parents' support, I managed to recover enough to leave my parents' house. I now work part-time at the company I previously worked for once a week as a step toward reintegrating into society. During this time, I haven't had any contact with David. Alice contacted me out of concern during the first 2 years.
How have you been?
But feeling that Alice had contributed to separating Ethan and me, I pushed her away. Because of you, I can't see Ethan. Don't ever contact me again. I think Alice understood something from my harsh words, spoken in a low voice. After that rejection, Alice stopped calling. She may have occasionally contacted my mom to check on my condition, but my mom refused, and for nearly 3 years, there has been no contact. At that time, I was deeply distressed and didn't want to talk to Alice, but now, having calmed down somewhat, I feel I could have a conversation if she called. Of course, I don't intend to call her, but I need to clarify things with David, so I know I'll have to contact him eventually. While I had been hesitating to make the call, the opportunity to talk came soon. It was after I finished my morning part-time job and came home. My mom was also at her part-time job, and my dad was at work, so no one was home. On days when I got home early, I usually did the housework, so I was cleaning the living room and bathroom when my phone rang on the table. Seeing Alice's name on the screen, I answered. "Hello?" A bit nervous about the unexpected call, I could hear Alice choking up on the other end.
Hello, Jennifer.
"Yes." Hearing Alice's unchanged voice for the first time in a long while, I responded.
It's been a while. How are you?
"I'm fine." What could she possibly want? After years of silence, I couldn't believe she was calling just to check on me. I felt a bit foolish for being on edge.
I heard Ethan got into Harvard. You should let me see him.
What? After a few seconds of silence, Alice suddenly said something that made no sense. Ethan got into Harvard? What was she talking about? Ethan had died before he even had the chance to take college entrance exams or properly experience childhood, and now Alice was saying he got into college. I began to wonder if Alice had lost her mind over the phone. If she didn't remember Ethan's death, I needed to remind her. Ethan died 5 years ago. Not being able to be with Ethan in his final moments was unbearable. It was all because of David and Alice. Thinking that made my chest tighten with pain, and anger started to well up inside me.
So you really didn't know. David said he would explain everything to you.
Alice sighed deeply at my reaction and whispered quietly, "What didn't I know? What did David say he would explain?" I was confused and didn't know how to respond.
I'll tell you everything I know. And then you need to talk to David.
With that, Alice began to tell me the truth, going back to the day 6 years ago when Ethan collapsed. 6 years ago, when Ethan collapsed, David and Alice told me that Ethan didn't want to see me, but apparently he never said that. Alice had picked Ethan up, and David had come home first to check on him. After that, David told Alice that Ethan said he didn't want to see me, so it might be better if we didn't meet. Alice thought it was odd for Ethan to say such a thing, but accepted it because of David's insistence and didn't tell me anything.
I should have gone to ask Ethan how he felt back then.
Alice continued. When David told me to go back to my parents' house, Alice insisted that I should be called back immediately, but David opposed it.
Jennifer is about to get a promotion with a potential overseas assignment. She's already stressed about Ethan. This is the best solution to not hold her back.
David had made up a story about an overseas assignment. There was no overseas assignment.
Yes, I found out that was a lie a bit later.
Realizing David's lie, Alice insisted that I should return for Ethan's sake, but that's when she discovered the real situation. Apparently, David had been seeing another woman for some time and was planning to gradually introduce Ethan to her. Of course, hearing this made me furious. How could he do something so horrible? I raised my voice, accusing Alice. Alice wasn't defending David, but also couldn't bring herself to scold him. Moreover, when David told Ethan the truth, Ethan and the woman had already met, and David had told Ethan that I didn't want to see him and had abandoned him. That's awful.
I tried to tell Ethan that you hadn't abandoned him, but he completely believed David and had grown attached to the woman.
Alice's voice was somber, filled with guilt over what her child had done. But I couldn't forgive her. Why didn't you stop them? If you had just told me that Ethan was alive, things would have been completely different. I shouted at Alice so loudly that my throat hurt. My hands and feet started trembling with my anger.
David threatened me. He said if I told you the truth, he'd never let you see Ethan again. I'm sorry.
I knew it wasn't Alice's fault, but she was the only one I could direct my anger toward, so I blamed her. Alice apologized as she continued her story. A few days before I heard about Ethan's death, David had shown up with his mistress in front of Alice. He told Alice that he planned to take Ethan and live with the mistress. Alice, considering my situation, repeatedly asked David about our relationship and advised that if he was going to divorce me, he should do it quickly for Ethan's sake.
If we divorce now, who knows what will happen to Jennifer? And if we divorce, there will be issues with asset division, custody, child support, and alimony. Jennifer earns more, so she might get custody, and then Mom wouldn't see Ethan again.
That's what David had said. It seemed he had smoothly deceived Alice. It wasn't entirely false either. If this had happened before Ethan died, I was still working and earning more. Respecting Ethan's wishes would be important, but if it were known that David had an affair, he wouldn't get custody. But I would never say that Alice couldn't see Ethan again. Alice said she panicked, unable to make a calm decision, and followed David's lead. As a result, they decided to tell me that Ethan had died, fearing that if I knew he was alive, I would take more money or cause custody issues. It seemed like an absurd story, but Alice explained that she had been too panicked to make a rational decision and couldn't oppose David. My father-in-law was furious, saying it was an insane idea, but David and Alice wouldn't listen. Alice was told to get a divorce, and David cut ties with his father.
At the time, I thought my husband was wrong. But now I realize I was the one who was crazy. I couldn't stop David, who was behaving abnormally.
But this is too much.
I know. That's why I contacted you now, Jennifer.
For a while after the story of Ethan's death, David also allowed Alice to see Ethan, but the visits gradually decreased. By the second year after I left, they had completely cut ties. However, recently, Alice met David's friend and co-worker who said that David was bragging about Ethan getting accepted into Harvard. Alice wanted to contact David, but after calming down, she decided to tell me the truth first. She had initially brought up Ethan to see if I was in on David's plan to keep Ethan away from her. I understand everything now. I'll talk to David first. I'll update you afterward. By the time our conversation ended, I had calmed down enough to sympathize with Alice a bit. Talking to her wouldn't get me anywhere. I needed to speak with David first. I ended the call with Alice and decided to contact David. It was still early evening, so he was probably still at work. I sent him a message first. While waiting for a response, I handled some household chores and then told my mom everything Alice had said. My mom turned pale and listened silently, not saying anything, but leaving everything up to me. When my dad came home in the evening, I told him the same thing. He turned red with anger and shouted that he wanted to bring David here immediately, but I explained that we needed to talk to David calmly now that we knew Ethan might be alive. He grudgingly agreed, though he still looked dissatisfied. That night, David called me. I took a deep breath before answering and heard his casual voice, unaware of anything.
It's been a while. What's up?
I need to talk about our future. Can we meet soon? David was silent for a moment before agreeing. After arranging to meet David, I contacted some acquaintances and hired a skilled lawyer. After explaining everything, the lawyer said that the divorce would be straightforward and I could receive alimony. However, since Ethan was already 18 and considering college expenses, they couldn't guarantee custody. Knowing that Ethan being alive would be enough of a relief and that I just wanted to clear the misunderstanding that I had abandoned him, I asked the lawyer to proceed without seeking custody. The day I met David, we met at a cafe near his office. I arrived early and prepared for our discussion. The lawyer advised me to get David to confirm his infidelity and when it started. If it began after our marriage had broken down and after we had separated, seeking alimony for infidelity might be difficult. Therefore, I needed to skillfully guide David into revealing when the affair started. To gather evidence, I placed my phone face down on the table to record our conversation.
Did you wait long?
David arrived on time, looking a bit older than the last time I saw him. Well, it's only natural that we'd both change after 5 years. Not at all. I just got here. David seemed a bit relieved and sat down across from me. He loosened his tie and ordered a coffee from the waiter.
So what's this about our future?
I got a call from Alice the other day. David, expecting a discussion about our divorce, widened his eyes when I mentioned Alice. Then I heard him gulp audibly. Ethan got into Harvard, right?
What are you talking about? Ethan died 5 years ago.
Alice told me everything.
Mom must be senile. She's been acting strange lately.
I expected that response. I figured he would try to say Alice was crazy to keep the truth hidden, so I mentioned his friend Mike, who Alice had spoken to. Mike, right? Your friend and coworker. David's expression tightened. It seemed I was right. Alice met Mike the other day, and he said you were bragging about Ethan to everyone. So when I met him and heard the story, I was shocked. A few days before meeting David, I called Mike using the number already in my phone. We met in person, and I heard everything. He thought I divorced you and dumped Ethan on you. I didn't know that either.
No, I mean,
And it seems you've remarried. How did you manage to marry another woman without divorcing me first? Is that even legal in America? I had no idea. I smiled broadly at David. Sweat started to drip down his forehead, and his eyes began to dart around. You've done a good job hiding it until now. I wondered why no one at your company had found out, but then I heard your new wife works in the HR department. Were you manipulating information or something? David remained silent as I continued questioning him. Anyway, it's not important. When did you start seeing her?
about 3 years ago.
That's strange. Mike told me you got married 5 years ago, right after I was told Ethan died, and that your relationship started 2 years before that.
How do you know all this?
You have a loose tongue. Mike thinks our divorce was because of your affair. From what Mike told me, David must have wanted to talk about his affair with someone, and he chose Mike. But Mike believed David was entirely at fault and that the divorce was inevitable. When I explained the truth, Mike seemed surprised but quickly understood, feeling that it was typical behavior for David. He even laughed at how David managed to avoid trouble until now. David was in a difficult position because Mike had talked. Why don't you just come clean? I sipped my iced coffee and smiled at David. He glanced at me and let out a big sigh.
Being with a woman like you was suffocating and miserable.
David began to speak, saying his pride as a man was wounded. He was hurt by the fact that I earned more, was good at my job, got along well with Alice, and managed parenting well. He found me too perfect. If I had any flaws, he could feel superior by compensating for them. When he lost confidence, he met his mistress, who was helpless and needed him, which made him feel cherished and protective. I was never perfect. It just seemed that way because Alice was there, and I could do my best because I had you and Ethan. This wasn't a lie. When I was struggling with whether to continue working, Alice and David encouraged me, saying they would all take care of Ethan. When I was down about my work, Alice and David comforted me. I couldn't count how many times they had saved me.
But you've managed to survive without me, haven't you? She needs me.
It was the kind of thing you hear often. The idea that a woman can't survive without a man's protection. What century is this? Women have always managed on their own. Seeing David's pained expression, I felt nothing. Then divorce should have been fine. Why go to such lengths?
If we divorced, you'd get alimony, child support, custody, and everything. I couldn't pay all that, and I couldn't stand the thought of never seeing Ethan.
Ridiculous. Then you shouldn't have had an affair, and pretending Ethan was dead without considering my feelings was wrong. David fell silent at my words. I took a deep breath and placed a paper in front of him. Ethan is an adult now. What happens next is up to him. But our relationship needs to be clarified immediately. Will you sign this?
A divorce paper.
David looked at the paper without surprise and muttered quietly, I will be taking alimony. After a moment, David took a pen from his pocket and started signing the divorce papers. Just as he was about to finish, an unexpected person appeared before me.
Mom.
I looked towards the voice and saw Ethan, looking very different from when he was 12. I was stunned to see Ethan appear, never expecting him to show up. Ethan was also very surprised to see me there, likely not expecting me either.
Why are you here?
Ethan? I've wanted to see you. Seeing Ethan brought back memories of how much he had grown and all the pain I'd endured. Tears started flowing naturally from my eyes. I stood up and reached out to Ethan. However, Ethan swatted my hand away and glared at me sharply.
What are you doing here now? You abandoned me.
My heart skipped a beat at his expression and attitude. I didn't abandon you, Ethan. I never abandoned you. I wanted to shout this out loud. But causing a scene here would disturb the other customers, and if I told him everything, it might ruin the relationship between David and Ethan. Not that I cared about David, but considering Ethan's feelings, I couldn't say anything.
Ethan, actually.
Stop. There's no need to say it now. Just finish signing. Suppressing my urge to hug Ethan, I averted my eyes. David muttered a small "oh" and continued signing. Ethan glanced at the paper David was signing and looked surprised again. As soon as David finished signing, Ethan grabbed the paper.
A divorce paper? Didn't you tell me you divorced Mom about 4 years ago? And that's why you married Emily?
Holding the divorce paper, Ethan looked at David. Even Ethan thought we were divorced. I was thoroughly disgusted with David. We're not divorced. Ethan, we need to talk. I took the divorce paper from Ethan and put it in my bag. I picked up my phone from the table and looked closely at Ethan's profile before leaving. I've always wanted to see you. You've grown so much. Saying this, I left a $10 bill for my drink and exited the cafe. Tears started to flow again. I couldn't tell what kind of tears they were. Was it the joy of seeing Ethan again, or the sadness of being rejected by him? Maybe it was also the sadness of divorcing David. I didn't know what was causing my tears. I walked away from the cafe and sat down on a nearby bench, wiping away my tears. No matter how much I wiped, they kept coming, and soon I felt like I couldn't breathe.
Mom,
As I sat there trying to calm down, I saw Ethan running toward me, out of breath. He hurried over and stood before me.
Dad told me everything. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I'm really sorry.
Sweat poured down Ethan's forehead, mixed with tears and a sorrowful expression. I pressed my handkerchief to his face and smiled. It's not your fault. Your dad and I were wrong, and you're alive. That's all I need to be happy. Feeling my chest tighten as Ethan accepted me, I hugged him. Ethan buried his face in my shoulder, sniffling and trembling slightly. Ethan said it was a coincidence. He saw me as he was just hanging out with friends and saw me at the cafe. Seeing David and then recognizing me, he instinctively approached. Whether it was divine intervention or pure coincidence, it turned out well. David and I divorced without issue. David easily admitted to his affair, so I didn't need to record anything, and I could claim alimony from both him and his mistress. Since Ethan was a college student, he started living on his own, with custody remaining with David. Now that he was away from David, he occasionally met with me and also saw Alice. David and his mistress were exposed at work and faced demotion, leading to their resignation. They moved far away, and though I've heard they live a decent life, I don't know the details. My previous employer rehired me full-time, so I returned to work completely. Though my position isn't as high as before due to my age and long absence, I'm grateful to be back and work hard every day.